Have you ever noticed that when someone asks how you're doing, you usually give them the short version? I'm fine. I'm hanging in there. Oh, same old, same old. But what would you say if someone actually had the time to sit down with you and hear the whole story? Because there's usually a whole lot more behind I'm fine. There are things you're trying to figure out, things you're still carrying, and probably a few things you've thought about doing but haven't quite done yet. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, you might even be waiting until you feel ready, waiting until the timing feels right, waiting for someone else to tell you it's okay to finally do the thing you've been thinking about doing. But what if the permission you've been waiting for was never supposed to come from somebody else? Hey there, welcome to the podcast where we talk about what comes after the parts of life that change us. The healing, the rebuilding, and finding your way back to yourself. I'm Jenny, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. Have a seat beside me on the porch swing for a while. I have a few stories I'd like to share with you. I don't know what chapter of your story you're living right now. Maybe you're standing at a crossroads trying to figure out which direction to go. Maybe you're carrying around an idea you've never shared with anyone because you're afraid it sounds too big, or maybe too small. Maybe you've been telling yourself you'll get to it someday, when life settles down, when you have a little more time, when you feel more confident, or when everything finally falls into place. I think we've all done that. We get so used to waiting that after a while, it doesn't even feel like waiting anymore. It just starts to feel like the way life is supposed to be. Sometimes something shifts on an ordinary day when you aren't expecting it. It can happen in the middle of a conversation or while you're sitting alone with your thoughts. And in the moment, you probably don't think much of it. It's only later when you look back that you realize something changed that day. You made a decision, you saw something differently, or for the first time, you stopped waiting for someone else to tell you what to do next. But somehow, when you look back years later, you realize that was the day your life quietly started moving in a different direction. As you listen today, I hope you'll think about your own story. Not just the short version you usually tell, but the whole story. Because I have a feeling there are a few ordinary moments in your life that changed you too. Today, I'd like to share a few of the ordinary moments that changed me, even though I didn't realize they were changing me at the time. The question I didn't know how to answer. If you walked into Dr. Denise's office, the first thing you noticed was that it didn't look much like a therapist's office at all. Her chair sat off to the right, and across from her were two couches. There was a long couch against the wall and a smaller love seat directly across from her. I always sat on that love seat. Between us was a little table with snacks and candy sitting in a bowl. There were plants tucked into the corners, paintings on the walls, and bookshelves lined with books she'd let you borrow, if one seemed like exactly what you needed. Looking back now, I wonder if she designed it that way on purpose. Before either of us said a word, the room already felt like it was inviting you to settle in. One day, I was sitting on that little love seat across from Dr. Denise, trying to explain something I didn't really know how to explain yet. By then, my boys had started spending weekends with their dad, and I remember telling her how empty the house felt when they were gone. For over 20 years, I'd been taking care of somebody. My husband traveled for work most of the year, so I was used to making the decisions at home, raising the boys, and keeping our business running. My days had always revolved around what everyone else needed. Now, all of a sudden, I had entire weekends to myself, and I had no idea what to do with them. I remember sitting there across from her and basically saying, "What am I supposed to do? I've always had my kids. I don't even know what I like to do by myself." She smiled and said, "Then do something for yourself." I understood what she meant. I just didn't really know how to do that. So she started giving me the simplest examples. Take a bath, read a book, find something you enjoy, and do it just because you want to. And I remember sitting there thinking, okay, but what do I enjoy? I genuinely didn't know. I understood the words she was saying. I just didn't know how to do them. Somewhere along the way, I'd gotten so used to taking care of everyone else that I honestly couldn't think of what I liked anymore. A few sessions later, our conversation shifted toward work. I remember telling her I had no idea what my future looked like. I hadn't worked outside our home in over 20 years. Going back to school didn't seem practical, and I wasn't sure where I fit anymore. She sat there for a moment before asking me a question that completely stopped me. What does Jenny want? It should have been an easy question. Instead, I just sat there. I could have told her what my kids wanted. I could have told her what my family needed. I could have told her what everyone around me hoped I would do. But when it came to me, I honestly didn't know. After a long pause, I finally said, "I think I'd like to speak." Not because I thought I had all the answers, quite the opposite. I wanted to talk about what I'd lived through. I wanted people who had been blindsided like I was to know they weren't the only ones trying to figure out how to put their lives back together. She encouraged me to look into public speaking. I did. I even started researching it. For a while, I thought maybe that was the direction I was supposed to go. Around that same time, my sister-in-law and I were on the phone like we had been so many times before, talking through the twists and turns my life had taken. Somewhere in the middle of that conversation, one of us joked, "You could write a book about all this." Then we laughed and said, "Or start a podcast." Looking back now, I don't think that conversation was really about a podcast. For the first time in a very long time, someone had asked me what I wanted, and little by little, I started learning how to answer. I think it was the first tiny glimpse of my own voice trying to find its way back to me. Looking back now, I don't think the podcast started the day I bought a microphone. I think it started the day someone asked me a question I didn't know how to answer. What does Jenny want? The name that changed everything. One afternoon, I was sitting in my office scrolling through Facebook, and I kept coming across quotes and memes that seemed to put words to things I was feeling but didn't quite know how to explain yet. I'd read something and think, yes, that's exactly how I feel. Every time I found one that hit me that way, I wanted to save it somewhere. There was just something comforting about finding words that made me feel understood when I was still trying to understand so much of it myself. The problem was I didn't want to share all of them on my personal Facebook page. I'd always been a pretty private person. Even though my world had been turned upside down, I wasn't ready for everyone else to know what was happening. Besides, if I started posting every quote that spoke to me, people would have wondered what in the world was going on. So I did something that seemed pretty simple at the time. I created another Facebook page. It wasn't created as a business page. I wasn't trying to build a following. I wasn't dreaming about a podcast or creating journals or any of the things that have become part of my life today. I just wanted a little place where I could keep the words that were helping me make sense of what I was going through. I remember sitting there trying to think of a name. The first one I came up with was me, you, and her. At the time, it made perfect sense to me. That's exactly what my life felt like. So I created the page, gave it that name, and didn't think much more about it. The next time I was sitting across from Dr. Denise on that little love seat in her office, I told her about it. I was actually kind of proud of myself for creating it. It felt like I'd found a healthy outlet for everything I was carrying around. She smiled while I was talking, but the minute I told her the name, she shook her head. "Oh no," she said, "we're not keeping that name." I remember looking at her, a little confused. She said, "This isn't about them anymore. This is about you." There wasn't anything harsh about the way she said it. She wasn't criticizing me. She was gently trying to help me see something I couldn't see for myself yet. Until that moment, everything in my mind revolved around what had happened to me, what he had done, what she had done, how our lives had changed. Without even realizing it, I had made my healing revolve around them too. Dr. Denise was trying to hand my story back to me. I went home that day thinking about what she'd said. The more I sat with it, the more I realized she was right. If I was going to tell a story, it couldn't keep being centered around everyone else. It had to become my story. Somewhere in the middle of all that thinking, a new name came to me: Momma Drama and Trauma. The next time I saw Dr. Denise, I told her I'd change the name. This time she smiled and said, "Now that's more like it." Looking back now, I don't think changing the name was really about a Facebook page. It was the first time someone gently reminded me that I was allowed to tell my story. But if I was going to tell my story, it needed to be about me, not them. Because I couldn't change the story they had created. I could only tell mine. Table for one. I was out running errands that afternoon, just driving from one place to the next, checking things off my list. Around lunchtime, I happened to drive past Olive Garden, and out of nowhere, I started craving their soup and salad. I can still remember sitting at the stoplight thinking, that sounds really good. Then another thought came just as quickly. I wish I had somebody to go with. I sat there for a second, thinking about who I could call. Then another little thought slipped into my mind. You could just go by yourself. I don't know why that had never crossed my mind before. I sat there for another minute, talking myself through it like I always do. If you know me, you know I'm an overthinker. I remember thinking how strange it would probably feel to walk into a restaurant by myself. It wasn't that I was afraid to, it was just something I'd never done before. Finally, I pulled into the parking lot. When I walked inside, the hostess smiled and asked, "How many?" I smiled back and said, "Just one." Those two little words felt awkward coming out of my mouth because I don't think I'd ever said them before. She picked up one menu, one set of silverware, and walked me over to a booth. I sat down, ordered exactly what I'd been craving, and waited to feel uncomfortable. Instead, I ate my soup. I enjoyed my salad. I dipped my breadsticks in the soup just like I always do. And I sat there in the quiet with my own thoughts. It was peaceful. When I finished, I paid my bill and walked back out to my car. Nobody in that restaurant knew anything had changed. To everyone else, it was just another woman eating lunch. But I knew, because somewhere between sitting at that stoplight and walking back to my car, something had shifted. I had stopped waiting for someone else before letting myself enjoy something as simple as lunch. It wasn't really about Olive Garden. It was about realizing that my life didn't have to wait until someone was sitting across the table from me. Sometimes the smallest moments end up changing us the most. Building the porch swing. Most days, if I really needed to concentrate, I'd carry my little tabletop desk into my bedroom and close the door. My office downstairs was wide open to the living room and the front entryway, and with 3 boys in the house, there was almost always something going on. They'd be laughing, talking, playing video games, or just being boys. I found myself asking them to be quiet more often than I liked, and after a while, I realized something. They weren't doing anything wrong. They were just living their lives. So instead of asking them to change what they were doing, I'd gather up my things and head to my room. One afternoon, my little tabletop desk was sitting across my lap. My laptop was open in front of me. My notebook was beside me with pages already covered in notes. My pink water jug sat within reach, and every now and then, my phone would light up beside me before going quiet again. The house faded into the background once I closed the door. At the time, I was working on a journal. I kept thinking about all the things I wished someone had handed me after my world fell apart. The questions I wish someone had asked me. The words I wish someone had said. So I started writing them. One page turned into another, then another. After a while, I caught myself thinking, it would be nice if other people could hear these words too. So I started working on an audio. Then I thought it might be nice if someone could follow along while they listened. So I started putting together a slideshow. I remember looking down at my notebook and smiling because every time I crossed one idea off the page, 2 more took its place. The only problem was I had no idea what I was supposed to do with any of it once I was finished. I sat there for a long time, flipping through my notebook, looking at my laptop, wondering how all of these pieces were ever supposed to fit together. Then, little by little, they did. Not because I had some big plan, just because I kept asking myself one simple question. How do I make this easy for someone who might need it someday? The answer didn't come all at once. It showed up one little idea at a time. When I finally leaned back against my headboard and looked around the room, I realized I'd created something much bigger than the journal I'd started with. Somewhere along the way, it had become a place. When I think about the porch swing now, I don't picture a website or a collection of resources. I picture an old wooden porch swing as the sun slowly disappears behind the trees. The frogs are getting louder. The crickets are beginning to sing. There's a soft breeze moving through the fields. 2 people are sitting there together, sharing stories that maybe they've never said out loud before. Nobody has to pretend they're okay. Nobody has to have everything figured out. They're just sitting together, listening, talking, remembering. And every time I picture that porch swing, I smile, because somewhere between that little tabletop desk in my bedroom and that old wooden swing, I finally built the place I'd been looking for all along. Porch Swing Reflection. As I sit here on the porch swing with you, I find myself wondering about your stories and all the moments in your life that brought you to where you are today. Not the short version we usually tell, I mean the real one, the whole story. All the little moments that probably didn't seem important at the time, but somehow changed the direction of your life. Maybe it was a conversation, maybe it was a drive home from work, maybe it was standing in your kitchen one evening or lying awake in bed after everyone else had gone to sleep. Most of the moments that end up changing us don't feel like big moments while we're living them. They're just ordinary Tuesdays, an afternoon running errands, a quiet doctor's office, a bedroom with a closed door, or a lunch that almost didn't happen. We usually don't realize they've changed us until we're looking back. So right now, I'd love for you to think about one moment in your own life. Is there something you've been carrying around that you've quietly been waiting to begin? Something you know you want, but for whatever reason, you keep telling yourself you'll get to it later. And somewhere along the way, you might have started believing you needed someone else's permission first. If that's where you find yourself today, maybe don't worry about the whole journey. Just think about the next small step. Because when I look back at my own stories, none of them felt life-changing while they were happening. They were just small decisions made on ordinary days. Your story will have moments like that too. Maybe one day you'll look back and realize that what felt like an ordinary afternoon was actually the day everything quietly began. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today here on the Porch Swing. I hope today's stories reminded you that some of the biggest changes in our lives don't always begin with giant leaps. Sometimes they begin with a quiet decision that nobody else even knows we made. And if this episode made you think of someone who's been waiting for permission to begin something in their own life, I hope you'll share it with them. You never know when one story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. If you'd like to continue these conversations, I'd love to invite you to join me over at the Porch Swing. It's a quiet place where we can slow down together, tell the whole story instead of the short version, and continue these conversations through guided reflections, journals, exclusive audio episodes, and a community of people who understand what it feels like to rebuild a life one step at a time. You can find all the details in the show notes. As always, you are strong, you are worthy, and your story matters. Until next time, take care of you.